Okay, so it
there
does
we
say
are.
that, it does say that we are recording, so I'm notifying everyone that we are recording. And this is the August 9th meeting of the Neighborhood Associations Council of Clark County with a presentation by Deputy Brian Salsig, who will be presenting on some crime statistics for our neighborhoods in Clark County.
Okay, and obviously, Marilee, we need to allow him to do a screen share.
Right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
This is actually readable. Sometimes when I do this, it's got problems. So make sure you guys can see what I'm looking at here. Is
oh, there we go.
that better? Oh, wait, I need to switch this here.
Pull up a chair.
Is that better?
Yes.
It is.
Good. I'd like to just say thank you for that moment of silence and for the recognition of Jeremy's sacrifice. Obviously, with the sheriff's office, it's been a tremendous loss for us, and it's been something that's been on our mind, obviously, for several weeks. So we really appreciate the community's outreach on that. And it's just, in today's day and age, it's just nice to know that the support's still out there. Obviously, there's a lot going on with law enforcement, and a lot we're looking at change, and a lot of hopes and dreams for the future. But in this very moment, it was just nice to, feel the love and the support of the community. So that was great. Thank you all for that. All right, so on to crime, right? So today we're going to talk about a few things. Well, I guess I should probably introduce myself. My name is Brian Salsig. I'm the crime analyst here at Clark County Sheriff's Office. I've only been doing it for like 20 years now. So I don't know a lot, but I know a little bit. And it's an exciting thing for me to do. I really enjoy my job. Really enjoy the people I work with and the community I work for. So that being said, I can kind of walk you through what we know so far. And then I've got individual Excel files that I'll go ahead and get to Marilee in order to get to you guys. And that's for each one of your neighborhood associations. And it's got the crime from the last 365 days. And I'll show you how you can access all this online for yourselves whenever you guys want to. And I'm a little out of practice, obviously, because of COVID and everything else. I don't do my neighborhood outreach as much as we used to. Now that, well, things were opening up, assuming things get better, or if you guys have virtual meetings, even in-person meetings, depending upon how it's set up, I'm more than happy to attend. Just ask Casey Frazier to send me an email and I'll schedule time. And it's just one of those many things we like to do for outreach. All right, so today we're going to talk about measures of crime, basically calls for service, cases and crimes, and each one of those is a separate measure, and the media loves to mix and match these things, which makes things look worse or better depending upon what they're trying to sell you. So for instance, they may talk about like the shootings in Portland they have like 3,000 shootings over the last year. Well, that's actually shooting calls for service, which isn't an actual shooting event necessarily. It just means that somebody heard shots fired. And so some of those are just target practice or people just firing off guns because they're being a little crazy and that kind of stuff. The important number there that you're interested in is the homicides, which I think they're up to 98 over in Portland right now, which is a little high, a little concerning for them. Obviously, our preference is they keep that on their side of the river and we keep our safety on our side of the river. But so we're going to go through some of those different measures. Well, I'll talk about how kind of COVID has affected crime and changed some of what people have done. And then we'll first talk about the Sheriff's Office deployment and kind of, I'm sure you guys probably know most of this stuff, but just to bring everything kind of into perspective so you understand kind of where we come from. So right there's the big boss right there, Sheriff Atkins. He's got a budget of around 80 million, and we respond to about 75,000 calls for service in a given year. We also book around 15,000 inmates in a year, and that's not just us, that's all the cities in the county. So Vancouver and Camas and La Center and Ridgefield and all the rest of them. We handle about 15,000 inmates come through our jail for various reasons. That's Under Sheriff John Chapman. He helps the big man do all the good stuff. And then directly underneath and reporting to them, we have 3 chiefs. And that can be a little confusing sometimes because obviously if you're talking about like a police chief in a small city, and then we say chief, people don't always understand that there's a slight difference there, but the crossover is acceptable and understandable. Criminal Chief John Horch is responsible for 145 sworn officers. They patrol about 510 square miles. We have a patrol population of about 228,000 people. All total, that means we have 0.63 officers per 1,000 residents. So kind of to show you what that looks like in comparison, New York City has got like 4.3 officers per 1,000, and we're way down over here in this corner with our 0.63. So we've been at 0.63 to 0.65 since I've been here. We are historically understaffed. We've always been that way. Despite that, we seem to have a good portion of why we are so successful is because the community that we patrol is so great, right? So we don't have a lot of the problems that larger cities have. At the same time, we don't have the same budget that they do. So when people talk about like defunding the police and that kind of thing, you can see like New York has got a little bit of room in comparison to what we do. In fact, we actually get calls from a lot of other agencies trying to figure out how we manage to patrol at the levels that we do and still have the success that we do as an agency. So that's quite common, actually. If we were to patrol at the level that New York Police does, we'd have to hire 810 new officers today. And I got to tell you, I don't know what we would do with them. I honestly couldn't tell you. They would stand on each other for all I know. That's way too many people for us. I have no idea how that works. King County SO, if we were to patrol at their level, which is a little over 1.5, we'd have to add an additional 245 officers, which is quite a bit. We'd be almost like, double the size of the agency in certain respects. So that's a lot more officers than we expect to. And then Portland Police, right, if we were to staff at their levels, it would be 174 officers. So as you can see, we're a little less than a lot of people, and a lot less than a lot of people. And that's just been historically where we've stood. So, to just kind of bring into those conversations that people talk about defunding the police, I can actually kind of understand that because like in terms of New York, I don't know what they do with all those extra bodies, right? So maybe they have some flexibility in their budget to move it to other things. In Clark County, we're really interested in trying to stand up new services in order to kind of fill those gaps for us. It doesn't have to always be done by police, that's for sure. And so that's just kind of how things look in comparison. I want to thank the sheriff for defunding us so early so we wouldn't have to worry about it in the future. He thought that was funny. All right. My corrections chief, Phil Sample. He is our new corrections chief. For those of you who've been around, you probably used to know Rick Bishop. He was the charge of the jail for forever. Like, I think they built the building around him and they probably had to open a door in order to let him get out. He's been here a long time. Now we have Chief Phil Sample. He's great. He's responsible for about 151 corrections officers. We have a jail capacity of around 750 beds, but because of COVID, we have about 313 that we do. We're the only jail for all the Clark County agencies. So regardless of where they go or where they get arrested, they usually come here. On rare occasion, Camas or somebody may take their stuff to like Skamania, but that's kind of a hike for them. So they usually end up coming to us. And then we have just started a bunch of reentry programs. We've got some grants from the feds and a couple from the state. And we're kind of excited about that. So Phil is obviously pushing those things forward. And the one downside to COVID is in order to really take advantage of the reentry programs, you actually have to spend some time in jail. And right now we've gone from like a 15-day stay to closer to something to like a 10-day stay. There's not a lot that we can do within those 10 days, except for to point people at services once they get released. And obviously that's something that we're trying to adjust to now. All the reentry programs, at least initially, had the idea that people would be staying out with us for a little bit longer, but it is what it is. So, and finally, we have Chief Kerry Schultz. She has been with us for a long time as well. She is hero of the support branch. She started out basically as the sheriff's secretary forever ago. She worked her way up into working support services in the evidence logistics. And then most recently, she's been our chief for the last 4 years, I guess. So she's responsible for about 103 support staff. They stand up and they support both the enforcement side and the corrections side. She handles about 40,000 items in the evidence warehouse, which is a ton, not to mention all the logistics, all the bullets and belts and shoes and everything that comes with trying to run an organization this size. She's also responsible for the civil unit, which is all of your orders and evictions and seizures and all that kind of stuff. And finally, the criminal records department handles around 12,000 reports in a year. And then plus there's a jail side of that as well, who handles all the inmate documentation that comes in. So a lot of complexity, but we have a lot of great people working for us. So that's just kind of how we at the sheriff's office, I guess that's our deployment as it were. Now let's talk about those calls for service. So normally we have about 75,000. And then this is a very pretty graphic. There's a lot going on here, so we'll talk mostly about it. So up here at the top is the total number of calls for service that the sheriff's office has responded to since 2016. So you'll notice that we had a severe dip here in 2020, and you'll also notice that it's not the dispatch calls that went down. We were responding to just as many people calling 911 in 2020 as we did in 2016. So this has remained very, very constant. What has changed has been this gray area up here, which is our patrol initiated calls. And this is when an officer goes out and does something proactive. It could be a traffic stop, or it could be just talking with kids out on the street, or whatever reason we are. This is something we are trying to hopefully do a community caretaking activity of some kind and going out and talking with people. And you'll notice that in 2019, which is probably when we had the most people on deployment for quite some time, because we had some additional funding come in for some more officers, we actually had quite a bit more officer initiated. So you'll see that has decreased quite a bit here because of COVID. Obviously, we told our guys what everyone else told everyone else, which was, hey, slow down for a minute. Obviously, we still need to, catch those people that are speeding crazily down the street and driving drunk and all of those kind of things. But we want to limit our contacts for the safety of the public and the safety of ourselves. And so we ended up doing that. And then you'll notice down here in the blue, these are specialty calls for service. And that usually means something having to do with like civil. And so our evictions obviously went down quite a bit because we weren't evicting anyone. So there's a drop in calls for service down here as well. So that's just kind of how COVID has kind of changed things, at least for right now. And then we'll see new laws that have come into place, and the sheriff will speak much more eloquently than I will about those. May change this even further for how we're handling these calls for service. And I'm not sure that we will ever become quite as proactive as we were in the past, just because the tenure of those new bills are not really receptive to proactive policing. They're much more about responsive policing. So we're going to have to change a little bit about what we do. All right. Any questions so far? All right. Now, calls for service are broken out into, right now there's 6 priorities. It can go up to 8 depending upon what we're trying to crunch out. But basically a priority 1 call, which is 0%, luckily, they are the worst of the calls, which means basically I am running from a person with a knife. That is your priority 1 call, and you want us there, right? You want us there like right now. You wanted us there yesterday. We respond to those calls in just under 6 minutes on average, which is pretty good when you consider Hazeldale. Obviously, we respond to much more quickly than say Yakult, right? Because the officer up in Yakult may or may not be close to whatever that call is. A priority 2 is like I hear screaming, yelling, and furniture breaking. Obviously, something's wrong, and we're going to go and get there as soon as we can. We respond to those in a little less than 9 minutes. And it's all right. Obviously, we would like to be able to respond to those things a little bit quicker. It's not the same emergent circumstances that we know somebody is going to get hurt. We're just really, we're pretty sure somebody's going to get hurt, hence the slightly slower response time. Priority 3 is the most common call for service. You'll see like 51% of our calls right here are priority 3. And that's basically my house was burglarized. My vehicle was prowled, so that's a special Northwest term for when somebody breaks into your car and steals your stuff. So over in Portland, they call them car clouts, which I think are pretty awesome. Most places call it larceny from a vehicle, but we call them vehicle prowl. And then again, that's when somebody you left your car unlocked, or they decided to break the window and they took your laptop, or they took your coat, or they took your change, or whatever else. We saw a huge increase in that. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit during COVID. And that has a lot to do with criminals not having access to other forms of crime that they could do because people are home. So they started going after cars. And then a priority 4 is basically like a traffic collision or something like that. Something obviously we need to get to, but it's not incredibly emergent. Obviously, our response time for that is about 27 minutes. Anyone who's been part of a fender bender knows it can take us a little while to get to you at times, and that's kind of annoying, and I totally understand. Priority 5 is basically fireworks, and it's usually is only, so you got to remember this is an average. Most of the times of the year, we're a little bit quicker at getting to fireworks calls because we think that might also be shots fired calls because there's a lot of crossover because citizens don't often know. But during the 4th of July, we respond to a lot of fireworks calls, or we don't, depending upon how full the queue gets. So obviously this last 4th of July was huge, and the guys are really busy, but so is the fire marshals and everybody else. I'll be curious to see what we're going to do about that in the future because the queue got so full that basically Cressa almost shut down, which was pretty incredible. And finally, priority 6 is patrol information, and we don't really have a response time to that. That's usually we get information from a citizen, or maybe somebody's kind of complaining about people drag stripping up and down Highway 99 or something like that. We usually get there as soon as we can get there, but it's not always the most emergent kind of call, so we don't usually keep track of the numbers on that. All right, any questions about this slide? No? Okay.
Brian, there's
Yes, sir.
something going on with the top of the screen.
Yeah,
It's doing some sort of blinky thing and we can't see the title of the slide.
Oh,
I don't know if it's where your mouse is located at that's making it do that, or
let me try to move stuff around. Is it still there? Still have a problem?
it's still there.
Hang on, let's see if we can switch here. All right. I'm going to switch my screens here. How about now? Is it gone?
much better.
Yes.
I have 2 screens, and I've got one that's very large, which is great for me, but during presentation sharing, I've noticed that sometimes it has problems. So you'll look at me in profile a little bit just because I'm going to be looking at my second.
Yeah. I think Cheryl had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, unmute myself. On the calls for service, what about online reports? Is that listed? Is that part of any of this? Like if you have like a bike stolen or something from an open garage or something like that?
Yeah, technically it's a really great question. Technically that's like a priority 9 call is what they call it, because we don't actually send an officer out. So we don't actually keep track of the that breakout very often. And part of that has to do with the fact that we don't always get those calls that come in, because Cressa will grab the call, and before it can get to our queue, they'll have referred to the person to the online reporting system. So we haven't actually been able to capture that data.
Okay, like because we filed an online theft and got a report number and so forth. So I didn't know if that was included in any of this or if that is a separate statistic.
I keep it as a separate statistic just because it's not always included in the 911 numbers, because there's sometimes people, they don't even call the 911, they just fill out the online report.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, in fact, I probably should have broke those out. That is one of those things.
I just wondered if people are actually using the online reporting too, because it's not a priority. I mean.
Right. Well, and they are. We get right around 1,000 reports a year from the online reporting. And I imagine that's going to go up as we start shoving people more and more towards that. Obviously, that's one of the emphases of the new House bill is for us not to respond in non-emergent situations.
Right. To
push citizens more towards online reporting and those kind of things. I'm a little nervous about that just because I noticed that we don't have great numbers on it, but usually only say 4 out of 5 people actually fill out the online report. Right, we're missing some data because people will say, "Oh, I'll fill it out online," and then they just don't do it. They don't get to it. Right. When a person calls 911, usually the situation, they're pretty angry, right? Because usually something's been stolen or broken, and they want some results. So when we send out an officer, we get a police report. They get a police report, and we've documented that call. when they get turned over to 911, who then puts them onto the online police reporting, then while there's some extra effort they have to do on their behalf, and the longer somebody has to wait, the less angry and anxious they've become. And so then they just kind of give up and they don't actually fill out the police report, which is too bad, because then we lose a bunch of data, and then I can't figure out if there's a series going on in a neighborhood, or if we have a bunch of kids stealing yard gnomes or something like that, right? Because they just don't report it, which is a bummer. So we spend also a lot of time looking through like, what's that app? It's Nextdoor, right?
Yes.
People complain on Nextdoor, but they don't actually contact the police, which is a bummer. So
Yeah.
we spend some time looking on there.
That's one of the things when we see it in our neighborhood, we always ask, did you report it? Did you report it? And
Right.
trying on simple things like the gnomes, you know, which are back ordered, by the way, to have people report them, even, you know, we tell them all the time, even if you think it's insignificant, to report it, because you don't know if there is a pattern to this. So, but I never get follow-ups. I don't know if they do, but yeah, I just thought that would be kind of an interesting, since I know we're pushing it for us, you know, for people to do that, as well as street racing and so forth, but tell them to gather their times, put it all together and do a report. And they keep track of this. That's what I tell them. So I thought I better ask to make sure you do.
Oh, yes. No, it's we live by that data. Obviously, it's something that we really, really need. Otherwise, we can't effectively patrol.
Okay.
One of the worst parts about law enforcement is that we have a lot of data, but we don't always seem to be able to get it to the right people at the right time. So, you know, what happens is people report things that occurred overnight to the day shift, who doesn't always pass that information along to the night shift. And so usually part of my job is to try to make sure that flow of information happens. But because police reports aren't always completed at the end of the shift, and for a variety of other reasons, that information sometimes just gets bottlenecked. And that's problematic, and has been since I've got started. So hopefully one of these days we'll get a better handle on how to do that.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about our deputy liaisons is if we see something that is emerging, we actually I go on and hit up our lead guy, and he's always been very good at passing it on to the night shift too. So, and that's been really, really nice. So he knows we love them.
Yeah, use those deputy liaisons. That's what they're for. Marilyn?
One thing that's, I don't know if your Nextdoor account, if the sheriff has a Nextdoor account, if theirs is different than how ours is for the county, but one of the things that I try to remind, and I want to remind folks again of, is that me posting for the county, I cannot see what you're posting in your neighborhoods. I cannot see any of those posts. I can go on my own personal account in my neighborhood, and I can see what's being posted in my neighborhood through my own account. But through the county's account that I send out information on, I can't see anything. So for those of you that are administrators in your Nextdoor, if you don't bring it to our attention, we don't know about it.
Yeah, and that's the same for us. When I say that we're monitoring Nextdoor, it's the officers themselves who have Nextdoor accounts who are keeping track of all of that. So supposedly there's supposed to be a Nextdoor liaison with law enforcement, but that stuff has kind of changed over the last few years as companies have kind of backed away from some of the public safety.
And Catherine Montgomery had a question also.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to know, because of course on all the Nextdoors, I'm sure everyone's aware of the catalytic converters being stolen.
Oh.
But there's a little bit of confusion in my neighborhood as far as, like, we use 311 all the time. But we got some pushback, and I don't know if it's just kind of fear mongering or not, saying that the sheriffs aren't going to respond to parking violations. They're not going to respond to loud house parties. They're not going to respond to these things. And so it's making a lot of the more elderly neighbors in our neighborhood, they've kind of, been like, well, we can't call anymore, we can't do anything. And I'm really hating to see that disenchantment from, like, oh, or becoming disenfranchised with the sheriff's department. So is this misinformation, or is this going to kind of calm down and resort itself out in a couple months?
Yeah, well, so the sheriff will have better news and probably a better perspective on kind of some of
Okay.
those topics that you're talking about. From our perspective, I know it's something that we're afraid of that's happening. I still encourage them to call 311 at this point in time, because one of the things we need to be able to show the Washington State Legislature later is how many times people have called and we have not been able to go, right, for various reasons. If they don't call, then it'll show that there was never a need. And then, of course, the legislator will say, hey, we were geniuses, right? Look at how much crime we crushed because nobody's reporting any crime. Well, that's not the case, right? It's the difference is those, they haven't reported the crime. And those livability issues, that's the other thing. Even if we can't respond, we need to work with the county and figure out what kind of services can show up to respond to those things. Like at this point in time, we're setting up a crisis intervention team to work with the mental health stuff, but there may be a call to set up some sort of soft team that goes out and makes contact with these specific issues so that we can get there to discuss things like parking violations and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I still highly encourage you to call. At the very least, it'll give us information that we can take back to the legislator and say, look, we're not serving the community like you think we are.
Yeah.
This is how we're failing. This is what we need to do next.
Because the city of Vancouver just started their Paws on Patrol with like 80 volunteers to spot things. And we need a parking department, like meter maids. We need them here. And I think everybody's just frustrated and they don't know who to go to. And our liaison for our neighborhood has changed 4 times in the last 6 months.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
so
so-
sorry about that.
Yeah, we're kind of, it's like a magic 8 ball. Which deputy will it be today? So we kind of just want, to know where to call, because it's great seeing this, that the data is being analyzed, but I want to find a way to tell the neighbors and the people in our area, it's important, still call, whether they show up or not.
Yeah, that is a really good point, and something I'll probably actually bring up with the sheriff as a separate thing. I think 311 at this point in time is going to be your best option. But when I talk with the sheriff a little bit, maybe we'll come up with another plan to help kind of make sure that we're capturing that data. Because we also got our neighbors are now volunteers, the neighbors on watch who can go out and do tickets, and they help tag cars and that kind of stuff.
Because Deputy Spock from the traffic division, he has told us, well, he didn't get the reports from 311, and we're like, we called 311. So I think there may even be a disconnect with whether or not Cresta even forwards it, because I have called and tracked those calls, and then he has said he has not gotten them as calls to his department.
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, let me try to solve the loop on that. That's not good at all. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's continue on here. All right, so this is dispatch calls for service by hour. So a lot of people think most of our activity happens at night. The worst kinds of activity usually happen in the cover of darkness, but our actual peak points of calls for service are about 4 or 5 o'clock. And the reason for that is the culmination of several things. One, it's people getting off of work, so they get home and they realize something's wrong. The house has been burglarized, some of the things been vandalized, something like that, or the kid's missing, so they're going to report him as a runaway, or mom wasn't there, so they're going to contact APS, and then we have a missing persons. Not to mention all the collisions that occur because people, for some reason, they drive well in the morning, but at night, not so much, right? As they're headed home, no, not so much. So we have a lot of collisions that occur during that time as well. So that's why kind of this is our peak time. And then it's been this way for forever. I could show you a graph from 2010 or even from 2000. It would look exactly the same. So this is kind of how it works out every year. This is a super complicated graph that I like to show people so I can confuse my administrators. This helps create the false sense of security that they believe I'm smarter than them, which isn't true. but I have a pretty little graph that does this. So what this shows is that at 7 o'clock here, we can handle about 4.5 calls for service because of the number of officers we have on the road at that point in time. So as long as no more than 4.5 calls for service come in at 7 o'clock, we can respond to them immediately. But as soon as that 5th call comes in, well, then we're above the blue line here. And that means that person's going to have to wait. So that's when we start to triage the calls. And we start going to, it's just like the emergency room, right? You know, if you've got an axe in your head, you're going to get to the front of the line. If you have the sniffles, you're going to go to the back of the line. It's the exact same thing for us. So we are a little inundated early in the morning as people start to get to work and find out things are wrong, or they're calling us for various reasons. And so we don't have quite enough staffing during that time. So this area right here means that basically about 50% of the time, you're going to have an officer who's going to be available for you. Up here indicates that person's probably not going to be there for you. If they needed to, means you're going to have to wait a little bit. Right around 1500, about 3 o'clock, that's when our swing shift comes on. So we have a lot more people suddenly. So now we can handle almost all the calls that come in. And there's always going to be an officer available for you. 95% of the time, we're there. We have somebody who's going to be able to get there for you. And that lasts pretty decently until about midnight. And that's when the swing shift goes home. And then we're stuck with just the gray folks. And you notice here, we actually have additional bodies on the road. Well, that's just because even the tweakers go to bed at about 2 a.m., right? Even they have to find some sleep at some point in time. So we actually have a little bit more officers than we actually do have calls at that point in time. So we show this graph every year, and every year they say, hey, we should move this over here, right? Just make a switch over. And that's where we get into the whole guild and police unions and that kind of stuff, where they don't want to necessarily change those times. Eventually, hopefully, we're hoping to get what they call a breaker shift, and that should hopefully come in right about here, and we will be able to satisfy those call needs earlier. And so that's kind of how we're looking at that for staffing. All right, and then location-wise, our calls for service, as you can imagine, is not equal across the county. We spend a lot more time in Hazeldale and in Orchards than we do, say, out of Rush Prairie, right? That's just kind of the nature of what it is. A lot of it just has to do with the density. There's just that many more people in Hazeldale and Orchards than there is in the outlying areas. And of course, you can kind of see, like, you know, different spots that have a little bit higher calls for service. And then, like, the precinct is out here. So there's a lot of calls for service that end up getting located there, even though they don't necessarily actually occur there. It's just people coming to the precinct to report something to us. And these are the top 10 calls, or top 10 locations, I guess, for calls for service. They're organized by 2020. So obviously the precincts are usually where even though Central is technically closed, people use it as a base of operations all the time. I mean, it's been closed for what, 3 years now, and we still have people that come and knock on the door, and then they call 911 and want to know why the precinct hasn't been open because it's been closed for 3 years. And then we have to send an officer out there. That happens a lot. Stephen, you got a shark going on there.
It's one of my cats.
Okay. Just want to make sure you're safe. All right. The other big places we go to is Walmart on Highway 99. If you've ever been there, you probably know why. Prairie View Apartments is a big, there's a lot of people that live in those complexes, and so we end up there quite a bit. So the Legacy Complex, we're there quite a bit, and Bridge Creek Apartments. I don't think anything's surprising for anyone in terms of that. Obviously, the bigger box stores we go to a lot more often, just because there's a lot more activity that could and can occur there. And then places where shoplifting happens, like Winco, we're there more often because we're handling those type of calls almost always. Any questions about kind of locations or anything?
A little curious about Fred Meyer. Is that mostly theft?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's either theft or fraud, depending upon
Right.
which side of the coin it is, so to speak. And it's not necessarily just Fred Meyer itself. It's that complex that gets.
Right.
So it could be one of the smaller stores next door, or it could be, those kind of things. So, yeah, for the most part, I mean, part of the reason why I love living in Clark County, it's an incredibly safe place. We don't deal with a lot of violent crime. Most of our crime is property related in some way, shape, or form. All right. So on average, we write one police report for every 6 calls for service that we go to. So that confuses a lot of people. And just like I was talking about shootings before, we were looking at shooting calls. I think we go to about 1,500 shooting calls a year. Most of them don't involve a homicide, right? In fact, very few of them do. So in terms of, we go to a lot more calls that we don't actually take reports on. And there's a variety of reasons for that, because we'll get there and we'll find out it's not a crime, or somebody's suspicious in the neighborhood. So we'll pull up and we find out it's just some door-to-door salesman. So hopefully we don't hassle them too much and, you know, on your way and those kinds of things. So that happens quite a bit. There's just a ton of reasons why we end up coming to show presence, but we don't always have to write a report on it. Obviously, if a crime has occurred, and we try to encourage the officers out there to write as much as possible, just because if it's about your neighborhood and the question is, say, like a loud stereo, and we get there and then say they've turned that down because they realize the cops are coming down the street, so we can't hear it. Even then, we try to make sure if officers maybe will document that out. That way, the next time an officer goes out there, they can see that that complaint has been filed. And it's something we can look into for those kind of continuous issues.
Brian, may I ask a question? So on occasion, people will tell me that they have reported a problem, but when they call in to find out if anything's been written up, that there's nothing written up. So that would be the kind of cases we're talking about that don't get written up. A officer goes out, checks the situation, finds out there's nothing to really write up about. So in that case, if down the road, somebody finds out that in fact, the kids that were just quote messing around with the cars had actually taken items out of the car or something like that, then there would be nothing to reflect that very first call. Is that correct?
Not entirely. So the 911 system has, we take copious notes within the 911 system itself. So say an officer went out and maybe there's some kids in the neighborhood that probably shouldn't have been there. So we end up talking to them and saying, hey, what are you guys up to, right?
Okay.
No crime at this point in time, but we probably hopefully in the 911 call in the notes have put out, hey, we talked to Junior so-and-so and so-and-so. Then the next day somebody comes in and says, hey, there's a burglary in that exact same area. Well, then they can check the 911 calls from the night before and go, hey, they had these kids out there.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not to say that they're suspects immediately. It's just one of those things where it's like, well, we're going to put that out there. And then, you know, maybe we'll go talk to mom and dad or whatever else and say, you know, it was
Yeah,
just weird.
how helpful that is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I know. So these are some of the things that we're being encouraged not to do in the future. And that's something that the sheriffs will probably talk to you about, is they don't really want us to do those social contacts anymore, because that has the potential to turn into something that we don't want it to go to, right? Either a use of force incident or an arrest or something like that. So these are things that we've done in the past, and we're going to have to see how we kind of deal with it as we go forward. And like I said, the sheriff is pretty anxious to talk to as many citizens as he can to discuss those issues.
Thank you.
You betcha. So because I'm a big nerd, I can own up to that, particularly like a crime nerd, and I really like my numbers and that kind of stuff. I'm going to delve into a little bit here about how we count crime, because it can get kind of interesting. So we're going to use this example of a suspect. They break into the house, right? So they punched out a window. They go through the house, which is now they've done vandalism and burglary. Then they find the homeowner and they're going to punch them until they are unconscious. So that's aggravated assaults. Then they're going to shove the homeowner's romantic partner and steal their keys, which is robbery. And then they're going to steal the car, which is auto theft. Right? So depending upon who you are, there's a number of different types of crimes that could have occurred at this point in time. So the worst case crime, which is what a lot of places count, is just the robbery. It took that whole scenario and it distilled it down to the worst crime that was there, which is just the robbery. Right? So it would count it for that. The UCR stands for Uniform Crime Reports. It is what the FBI uses to measure our crime versus Portland's crime versus, you know, Washington County's crime. That's kind of the metric standard everybody uses. It takes all of those things and uses a hierarchy method and basically says, yep, robbery is the worst one. So we're going to only count the robbery as well. The new thing that came out was called NIBRS, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Is much more finite than UCR because people are complaining, hey, you're missing all these other crimes. You're only concentrating on the one crime. We wanted to learn more about it. So it says, okay, so looking at this scenario, we have a person who was robbed, so we're going to count that one. And we had a person who was assaulted, so we're going to count that second assault there as well. The house was definitely burglarized, so we're going to count that. And then vandalism occurred, so we're also going to count that. However, the auto theft is actually part of the robbery, so we're not going to count that little piece. So it's a little more complicated, but it gives you some better numbers. And then there's the all crimes approach, which is usually how I do a lot of my numbers, which is basically we're going to call everything a crime and count it. But obviously what that means is I have a lot more crimes than I do cases. So at some point in time, somebody's like, hey, how is that possible that we only have 5, say you only have 5 cases, but I've got like 6 burglaries, right? Well, that's because some of those cases may have multiple burglaries or something like that. So just kind of keep that in mind as we talk about these crime stats. I'll try to let you know how we're categorizing each one. And just be aware when people start throwing numbers at you that, they may be trying to make things look better or worse, depending upon if they want your money for, some additional patrol units, or maybe they're trying to say the community is a little bit safer, so they're going to go with that other number. So, excuse me. So these are what I call index crimes, and basically what it looks is I took all the violent crimes and I kind of stacked them together. That's this red section down here. And then I took all the blue property crimes and I stuck those things together, and they're all together here. And then finally, the fraud crimes up here are all together. So as you can see, 2020, we're a little bit higher than usual, right? So COVID did affect us in ways that we didn't expect. And I'm going to kind of break that out and show you why that is. The first thing you're going to notice here, though, is this fraud. So much more fraud during COVID. As soon as they started with those, the various stimulus checks or the all the out of work and stuff and all of those kind of things, the fraudsters just came out of the woodwork trying to sign up for every unemployment benefit that they could find. They were trying to get other people's stuff. They were trying to cash in on other people's taxes. It was just a mess. We had a huge problem with this. We worked a lot with the AG's office to try to figure out, particularly the unemployment fraud. I mean, we almost had a dedicated fraud detective for a while, several months. That's all they did was to try to chase those down. So that was a huge portion of this increase here, is this gray block up here, which is so much bigger, is those frauds. That was huge. We did see a little bit more property crime. Our violent crime, for the most part, stayed about the same. Some things that went a little bit less. One of the more concerning things, and we'll see how this year rolls out, is domestic violence actually dropped a little bit, but I think that's mostly because people couldn't report, right? Because usually in DV situations, the person reports when the offender leaves the house. But if the offender is at the house most of the time, they're not going to report. So we'll have to see in 2021 if that changes a little bit. That for us was just a little concerning because we expected to see more DV just because people together that often. I mean, I love my wife and we get along really well, so we don't have a problem. But I know, like, say, if you were to introduce like another element, like a best friend or somebody who needed a place to stay, I think that could get really old really quick and probably result in some issues. So, but needless to say, it's something that we're definitely tracking just to kind of see how that turned out. There's a lot of things that we expected during COVID that didn't happen. We expected commercial burglaries because we had basically businesses that were closed. We thought that those would increase. They didn't, not for the most part. And again, the DVs, which we thought were going to go just crazy. Again, we didn't get a lot of reports on that. It was a little bit less than last year. It wasn't completely gone. It was just less than we expected. That was for sure. To really kind of get into the weeds, we can talk about sexual assault. So for the purposes of these numbers, that includes forcible intercourse as well as forcible fondling and unwanted touching. So there's a lot that kind of is under the umbrella of sexual assault. And you'll see that in 2020, we're a little bit higher than 2019. In 2018, we had the most that got reported to us. And a lot of that had to do with a lot of the stigma that was once kind of attached to sexual assault started to disappear with the Me Too movement, which is fantastic. People should feel safe and be encouraged to report these kind of crimes for sure. 2019, we saw a little bit of dip, and then 2020, we saw a little bit of a rise. In Clark County, I can count the number of stranger rapes, like the person did not know the other person at all, on one hand, and I've been here 20 years. It is not common. Sexual assault between strangers is not common at all within Clark County. Nearly all your victims know of the offender in some way, shape, or form, and drugs or alcohol is the most common tool used to kind of overcome a victim's resistance. I think most people probably intuitively understand that, but we definitely have the numbers to help kind of back that up. Robbery. So that includes all forms of force used to commit theft. So it includes a bank robbery and a carjacking, but it also includes shoplifters that push a store employee out of the way, which is not quite exactly the same level, say like a bank robbery. And we're seeing that much more often than we used to. The vast majority of our robbery crimes are aggressive shoplifters. And a lot of them know at this point in time that the stores will not pursue. So they know if they can get off property, they're going to be safe and they're going to be fine because no one's going to chase them down. So, and that is almost all the stores like Safeway, Albertsons, Fred Meyer, Home Depot, Lowe's, all of them have basically said, hey, we're not going to get in the way of these people. It's not worth the money in order to get the lawsuits and all the rest of it. So for the most part, those are robbery crimes where they basically shove the employee out of the way and then they run. Bank robberies on the other side have become increasingly rare. We only had 5 so far in all 2020. I think we had 4 the year before that. We just don't have a lot of people robbing banks, which is great. A lot more people committing frauds, which isn't great, but at least we're not having bank robberies. Aggravated assaults is basically when a weapon is used during an assault or somebody's been so badly hurt that they had to go to the hospital. And then similar to rape, most victims know they're suspects. For the most part, we don't have a lot of stranger on stranger violence. And if we do, it's usually involving alcohol and possibly a bar where people aren't getting along. More recently, we've been seeing increases in not necessarily assaults, but brandishing, which is the displaying of a weapon. This is becoming much more common, which is too bad. A lot of the times people will be driving and, instead of the road rage incident where people are brake checking, they'll actually display a weapon. And that is concerning. So it's something we're trying to keep an eye on. Luckily, those haven't resulted in any kind of shootings or actual assault, but it is something that it's just not a great trend. And as we have more and more people who are trying to share the Second Amendment rights, that just means that there's a lot more weapons in play than there has been in the past. And it's just another point of concern for the sheriff's office, just because we don't know what kind of training that person has with that weapon or how they know how to use it or what kind of mental state they're at. All of those kind of things get a little bit questionable that we sometimes worry about. Then we've got simple assaults, which is like simple assault. Basically, somebody is beating somebody else up, right? So that's hands, feet, fists. This is the Donnybrook that goes on, between 2 individuals. In this case, still most victims know the suspect, though I've noticed it's not so big here yet. Over in Portland, those clashes between, like, say, the left and the right, those are all simple assaults for the most part. They can keep it over in Portland as far as I'm concerned. Not something I'm really interested in trying to develop on our side of the river. We would prefer people mind their business and be polite to one another as they have been in the past. Let's see, and what else is this? Oh, alcohol is a pretty common factor in most simple assaults as well. And that you'll notice with most crimes, alcohol or drugs is almost always a factor. It's one of those things that does have a tendency to lend itself towards criminal enterprise. All right, any questions about the kind of the violent crime that I've been talking about? No? Good. All right, as you can see, we haven't had a ton. We had 250, so less than 1 a day, aggravated assaults. And considering we have 252,000 people in this community, that's a pretty decent number, all things considered. It would be nice if it was 0. That's what we always go for, but this isn't so bad. Burglary. super interesting in terms of crime because there's a lot that goes on with a burglary, and usually most burglars are serial in nature. So from an analyst perspective, it's a lot of fun to like kind of play with. It's unfortunate that I find joy in a lot of victims, unfortunately, because, you know, in order for me to practice my craft, there has to be a number of victims, and that's just too bad. So it includes all unauthorized entry to the premise. It can also include people who've been trespassed from a location and then later are violated on the trespass order. So one of the things that's becoming more common is we have what we call prolific shoplifters, people who just, we're not talking, you know, Donnie, the 12-year-old who stole a candy bar. We're talking Nikki, who steals 18 Rogaine packages, you know, a day and then goes and sells them at some flea market or something like that. Those people, they try to trespass from the location so that when they do start shoplifting, we can get there and it's actually a burglary because they have been trespassed and you're not supposed to be in the building. And so we don't use that a whole lot, but it is one of those levers that we still have within the community. And it's definitely something we try to use with our commercial partners because retail organized crime, it can be a significant hit in terms of, you know, it's one thing if you got somebody who's just hungry and they're trying to get some food. It's another when this is how they make their money because they're stealing baby formula or razors or something that resells very well in the flea markets and things like that. During 2020, we had an interesting kind of shift. Since more people were at home, the number of burglaries to the actual residence itself went down because there's just less opportunity for my burglars to go out and do their thing. However, because there's more people at home, you guys are leaving your garage doors open more often because you guys were working in the yard and everything else. So we had to switch from people going in and stealing, like say jewelry and drugs from within the house to stealing things from the garage itself. So bicycles and power tools and all sorts of yard equipment. You know, if they could get it into the back of a car, they would do it quickly. So that's one of those weird things we noticed during COVID. In 2018, the most common items being stolen in residential burglaries was jewelry and medication. And in 2020, the most common items being stolen in residential burglaries are power tools and yard equipment because they're taking it from the garage. So it was just one of those interesting, like, oh, that makes sense, right? As soon as you look at it. Larceny, that's also theft. It's a fancy word for theft. It basically has increased, and this almost entirely, this large increase here has to do with items being stolen from vehicles. So instead of coming and stealing from your house, they're now stealing from your garage and from the vehicles that are currently in your driveway. So, and they are doing it in an incredible fashion. We've always had this problem with, say, kids and transients. Some of them are just trying to find a little extra food or money or whatever else. So they're going and getting things. But one of the newer things we saw over COVID is that like a van would just drop off like 15 guys and they would swarm the neighborhood and they would look for any car that was unlocked. They weren't really interested in breaking into like actually get anything. They would just lift the handle and see if the car was unlocked. They would get in there and they would steal your sunglasses and your coats. And if you had any cash, obviously they would take that. But then they would also hit that start button to see if you left your key in the car. Because a lot of us with that keyless ignition, we forget and we leave our key in the car. And so they would end up stealing the car. So as soon as they would get that first car, a bunch of them will pile into that one car and they would take off. And usually it was recovered in Portland or over in Tigard a couple days later. But it was kind of a new and interesting thing. We hadn't seen anything quite like that before. And so we've been working with our partner agencies to try to figure out, you know, who's kind of behind that or who kind of came up with that concept and where's it going on and that kind of thing. So that was different, you know. So just here is what it says in 2019, we had 442 reports of thefts. And in 2020, we had 718 reports of theft from vehicles. So quite a big increase there.
And Kat Montgomery had a
Just
question.
a quick thing. I lived in Seattle, and one of the things that they told us was not to keep your key fob in your purse by the door because they had boosters and they could boost it from where your purse was, start the car, and then be down the street. And most cars have a safety feature they won't turn off. So that's how a lot of them do it. It's not even if you leave the key in the car. It's just if it's in your purse and it's close to where the car is parked, they can boost it.
And no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And that's, I'm sure that's happening here as well. It's just one of those the sneaky things that people are doing these days. So yeah, tell your folks, making sure they keep those fobs away from the door as much as possible. And then it's the spare keys that usually get them, because they're hanging at the hook by the door, and that door is just close enough to the car to get that thing started. And as long as they don't turn it off, it's good to go. So yeah. All right. Finally, we're going to talk about motor vehicle theft. And so we've seen an increase in that as well. 2016 was kind of a banner year for us. And then we had some targeted emphasis with the prosecutor's office and with a couple of detectives, and we worked with the cities. We started to see a pretty decent increase or decrease in stolen cars. And then 2020, poof, oh my gosh, we are back, and we are back in style. And again, a lot of that has to do with COVID, but for reasons that I didn't expect. The most common vehicle stolen, and it's been the most common vehicle stolen for the last, got to be at least 7 years, is a Honda Accord or Civic 1992 through 2004. And the reason for that is those ignitions have been stripped out so much that you can jam pretty much any key in there and turn it over and it will start. And one of the things that we've noticed, particularly during the winter months, is we think that people might have been using them actually for housing, right? They were just stealing the car in order to kind of keep warm or trying to get it from transportation from point A to point B. Most of the cars are being recovered intact, though they are trashed considerably. And then in 2021, we've noticed a little bit of a change where they're now taking the catalytic converters and the batteries, which is a bummer, because those are almost as much as worth the whole car's worth at this point in time. So the other thing that we've noticed more recently, F-250s and F-350s. I don't know why those particular Fords are being targeted, but we are losing a lot of those. Again, they usually get recovered within about 48 to 56 hours, but they are often missing smaller components, usually the battery, sometimes the catalytic converter, sometimes just wheels and tires. So they just kind of take random things from them, and they are prolific. So for the most part, car theft occurs, it's like a nighttime activity, right? People go around and they find the car that's unoccupied. With the Ford F-250s and F-350s, it is an all the time kind of thing. So that you will walk into the grocery store and come out and find your Ford missing, right? And then the commercial trucks are, for whatever reason, something that really gets targeted. So like the poor Les Schwab guys, I think they've had at least 4 or 5 trucks stolen off, just because they're Ford F-250s. So if you just tell your people out there, keep those Ford F-250s parked up if they can, right? Or block them in with another vehicle at night. That might help kind of bring this down, at least until we kind of get an idea as to what's the big emphasis for stealing those particular cars, and we can hopefully, catch some people. So just so you all know. All right. Any questions about auto theft or theft in general? No? Excellent. All right. So the emerging trend, somebody, I forgot, alluded to it earlier, is catalytic converters. Oh my gosh. We are losing so many catalytic converters. It is ridiculous. Ford F-150, 250, and 350 are the most common vehicles getting the catalytic converters stolen at this point in time, likely due to relationship to the theft thing I just talked to you about. Right after that is commercial vans. So like the larger, like GMC Safaris, and then that Mercedes, like the bigger commercial vans, like, the plumbers and construction guys use and that kind of stuff. They're going in at night when these places they think that they've got the place secured, but they'll go over the fence and then they'll cut off the catalytic converters, which is really super annoying. And then the Toyota Prius, right after that, super common. I've asked several of our people who we've caught in the past, like why the Prius? And I've gotten various answers. So one is that the Prius, the catalytic converter it's got a little bit more metal in it that they're looking to recycle, so it's much more desirable. The other thing is that the Prius is a little bit lighter, so it's easier to jack up pretty quickly and get underneath, and then take the catalytic converter. So we're seeing a ton of those. So, and then RVs are the other thing that we've noticed for a while. My guess is those probably happen at a much more steady pace earlier in the year, but as people started getting their RVs ready for summer, they suddenly noticed that the catalytic converter was gone, and so that was problematic. So just to kind of keep that in space, so far we haven't found a decent, like they've talked about, like, well, you know, etch your VIN number on it or put a cage around it, all these kind of these little techniques. They don't seem to be super effective. None of those do at this point in time, which is too bad. I know Portland's working with us. We're trying to come up with a plan to help kind of circumvent and try to figure out what we can do about this particular theft issue. We used to have this problem with metal theft all the time. And so eventually what took place with that is we had it so that in order for you to recycle metal at this point in time, they don't give you cash on the spot like they used to, like they will for the catalytic converters. You have to go to the place, get the recycling thing. They then send a check to the address on your license, which takes a while. And so a lot of crime, they need to get high like right now, today. So to wait a week isn't kind of part of their thinking. So that really helped with the metal theft. Hopefully we can do something similar with catalytic converter thefts. All right, now the neighborhood stats, I got Excel files that they look very similar to what this one is, right? So we'll have like 3 components. One will be a map, which is going to show you all these crazy little places that stuff's occurring. There's going to be a little key here to tell you what all those different types of crimes are. And then I'll have a nice little pie chart kind of breaking those out. There'll be a day of the week, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. So you kind of see when crimes are occurring and what days are they occurring. And then finally, there's this awesome graph that people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know what it means. So what this means is that Wednesday at 7 p.m., that is when crime is most likely to occur in West Hazeldale. Don't know why, that's just a thing at this point in time. So that's just one of those pieces of information that will be included. And then there'll also be this nice little graph that shows you the total number of crimes that have occurred for each of the months. Now, I will tell you that while I've done this can you guys still see my screen? You guys can see this map thing that I'm showing you in here. If you tell your friends, if you tell your family that they go to communitycrimemap.com, they can get all that information plus a lot more. So this is what shows you, and then you can zoom in here to Clark County. As you get closer, it'll start putting some dots on the map, or it should. And make sure you can change your date range so that's got at least a couple of months, I guess. We'll back this up. There we go.
There's a link to this website on
There it
the
is.
top of the neighborhood reference page.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder if it's down. It wasn't down yesterday. Let's back up, see if we got even more. Well, that kind of made me a liar. I'm assuming it's down. I will double check. I can show you it from the other side here. It looks exactly the same. Give me 1 second.
Brian, it'll usually make me put an address in when you scroll up, if I put in some random address that's up above. And actually put an address in, then a lot of times then it will zoom in and come up.
Could be.
That's Arizona.
Yeah, it's Tempe.
Oh, well, that didn't help.
No.
try it. I put in a real address. There we go. All right, I'm going to show you the other side. So I know mine's working. There we go. Okay, so this is the last 365 days of crime, and there'll be a ton of this kind of stuff. You'll see we've got Vancouver's data in here, as well as we've got Battleground and Camas. So everybody's data should be in here, including ours. And make sure I've got my agency layers turned on. Your neighborhood associations are on here, but I should tell you that obviously we have an old shape file because some of these neighborhood associations don't exist anymore, or maybe they do, but just in theory. But by clicking on the neighborhood associations, you should be able to get that information, what crimes are occurring there. So if I choose, well, this isn't one of us, but, and if I go to the data grid, it'll show me all the crimes that are just there. And then if you click on the analytics tab, it brings up these charts and graphs that you can use, just like I've got for you guys. So I highly recommend that you check out that link and send it to people. You can even sign up for crime alerts, which allow you to look, like if some crime occurs within, say, a mile of your address, it'll send you an email letting you know. So it's just one more thing that I think citizens can use to help kind of keep themselves safe. And obviously we use it a lot. It should update once every 24 hours. Looks like we're having issues right now, so I'll get into that. But it should be fairly timely for the most part. So most of your crimes, they give the officer a day or so to write the report, and then it should be uploaded to the system a day after that. So everything should be within 48 hours.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Could you repeat, how would I sign up for the crime alerts? What exactly would I have to do?
Oh, sure. Yeah, to do that, you just say sign up for crime alert. There's a little button up here. And you'll put in your first name, your last name, your address, and pick your
Oh,
distance.
okay.
And I wouldn't do much more than a mile. A mile is actually a fairly decent radius size. I mean, if you go up to 5 miles, I mean, that'll be half of Vancouver. And you want to play with it a little bit. If you live pretty close to Hazeldale, you're going to get pinged all the time because there's always somebody getting something stolen in Hazeldale. Same thing with Orchards. It's just what it is. Just what it is.
Now, where exactly did you click on to get that box?
Sure. One more time. It's up here in the corner.
Upper right-hand corner
Okay,
there,
what corner?
upper right.
Upper right.
Well, the pictures are in the way. I can't see it, so.
Oh,
The group pictures, I mean, our individual pictures here, block it
No,
out.
no. Inside them,
oh, it's right here.
inside the screen with the map on it.
Oh, okay, sign up for crime alerts. I see it now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Community crime. Okay, thank you.
You betcha. Yeah, and so hopefully there'll be some crime stuff here later on today. I'll contact LexisNexis and figure out what's going on. You spend money with these people, they should have my crime up there. That's for sure. So,
Okay.
and then on the the left-hand side, you'll be able to do choose which crimes you want to see and which ones you don't want to see. Because sometimes some of them, like, you may not be interested in collisions, and you might only be interested in robbery or theft or something like that.
Ah,
Some of the stuff we hold back, homicides we don't always show. Well, not necessarily because we don't want you to know about the homicides, but because we have very few of them, and officers will often miscode things. So say we're helping out Los Angeles with a murder investigation because the suspect lives up here. They'll often code that as a homicide, even though it's technically not a homicide. So that's just one of those things that we end up usually not displaying homicides. And then some of the juvenile crimes we hold back as well because it's just not relevant. But everything else should be there. So, and then there's also sex offenders. That should be hopefully correct at this point in time. I have destroyed my map. You don't like me. Weird. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. So obviously it must be down for maintenance. Otherwise it would have told you stuff and not thrown that error out. So again, highly encourage you guys all to sign up for this and to, check in those crime things. If you ever have any questions about crime stats, please feel free to contact me, right? That's my information right there. I should probably put in my email. It's just my first name and my last name at clark.law.gov. And if you guys want me to
We
give,
get a switch over. We're still seeing LexisNexis.
thank you. Thank you. There we go. How's that?
Great.
And if you guys want me to come out, like I said, to do one of your neighborhood associations, and I can really dig into the weeds about your specific issues, I'm always happy to do that. It's one of the, we try to contact citizens as much as we can when you're not in an emergency situation so that you know that we're somewhat useful. Unfortunately, it's like EMTs, right? Nobody really wants to meet an EMT while they're on the job because that means something bad has probably happened. Cops are kind of the same way. So when we have these opportunities to come out and speak with you, we try to take advantage of them. That way you can just see us as regular cops and regular human beings, as opposed to like the person you see when there's an emergency situation going on. Oh, and full disclosure, I should probably tell you, I'm not actually sworn, so I'm myself not a cop. I'm a civilian employee, which is fine by me, obviously, but that's just one of those things in case somebody asks. We've got several non-sworn positions here in the sheriff's office, mostly having to do with technical stuff and stuff like this. And so not everyone you see at the sheriff's office is necessarily sworn, but we're all here to serve.
So you're not packing?
No, not me. Yeah, I make horrible situations having to do with physical under pressure things. You put me in pressure and give me a keyboard, I'm gonna do some awesome things for you. You stick me in a dark alley with a gun, I'm gonna hurt myself.
Oh, that's never gonna be good. Don't do that.
No.
All right. Oh, but Cheryl, what can I do for you?
I just had a question. This is regarding what Kat brought up on the key fobs for those keyless things. What is the range on that? So like how far away from the vehicle should it be
That's going to be
on average?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's going to be very dependent upon the house that you have and all of those kind of things. All I can say is to just try to start it, do a remote start, or have somebody hit the button, see how far you can be away. If you have cement, if you have like a cement house, right, it's not going to go near as far as if you have a stick built. And those kind of things are all of that makes a big difference. So for the most part, I think the key is supposed to be able to be within just, I think it's just 3 or 4 feet of the car, but with a booster, I think they can get it to 6 to 7. So just usually enough to get you to the front door where people hang their keys. Yeah, and boosters aren't super common. More often than not, somebody's just left their keys in the console just because they forget that they're there. I've done that myself on occasion. So.
Well, you never know. I mean, with all of the trouble with the garage doors openers, years ago when they did that, and technology being the way they is, then I'm not giving up my 21-year-old truck that's all manual. I had to teach my grandson what a manual. That means you have to use your fingers to lock and unlock that door. No, there's no button to push to get into the vehicle. No, the seatbelt does not automatically go. You have to roll the window down with the crank. What's a crank? That thing.
I've seen that
You don't even find those anymore.
I have one, and so if I ever happen to drive off and gets, into the river, I can roll my window down and get out.
It's a horrible thing to say, but that's
All
fine.
right. We'll watch for you.
Yeah.
It'll be sunk by then, but that's beside the point, But I will be floating on top of the river somewhere in Portland. Sorry, I'm tired.
Brian, thank you very much.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
been
good
fascinating.
information.
Thank
Always
you.
a
That's
pleasure.
a lot of good information.
Sure. So yeah, I'll get these other files out to Marilyn, and then I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I love hearing from the public. it's one of those things that I really enjoy doing. Hopefully I can get up to more of these things sooner. So.
Does Clark County Sheriff's Office pay any attention to Ponzi schemes like the ones that have been put upon us from 2018 on with American Equities Investments? Just say,
we have some very, very smart and savvy fraud detectives, and we haven't seen Ponzi schemes as much as we've seen. The most recent things have been the romantic ones.
I want them put in jail
Yeah.
for
Or
a
worse.
very long time.
Yeah, those are the
Yeah.
ones that we see quite a bit of. Well, and you probably saw the announcement from the sheriff's office. We have people who end up calling and they pretend to be members of the sheriff's office and they try to get you to, it's usually gift cards. And you think people would key into the idea that we're law enforcement, we don't deal in gift cards, right? We're never going to tell you to go to Google and get a gift card for us, go to Target, and we don't need gift cards. That's not what we
No,
do.
literally, I was thinking about other kind of things, but when you're talking about those kinds of phone calls, I'm very rude to those people, I must admit. I know what my fire district will ask of me, and I know that the sheriff's department is my sheriff's department, not the Hazeldale Police Department, for instance. And this guy called and I said, this is just not going to happen, and this, I don't trust you, go away, don't call me again. And he said, well, the next time you need help, don't call us. And I thought, well, how would you find something called the Hazeldale Police Department? We don't have such a thing. Anyway, they get very creative.
They absolutely. I was once in a meeting with the chief, and I got a call on my phone, on my work phone of all things, with a guy telling me that I had a warrant out for my arrest. I was like, oh, that's very concerning, right? And I said, well, who am I talking to? And they said, well, you're talking to, at the time it was Chief Evans. You're talking to Chief Evans. And I'm like, I have a hard time believing that. Like, well, why? Don't you think I'm the chief? I'm like, well, I'm looking right at him. So no, I don't think you. That's a new
That's
ventriloquist
funny, I
tactic,
love it.
right? I was like,
That's
did you want to talk
perfect.
to him? And then of course they clicked off at that point in time. So
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, and does it do any good at all to make notes of those phone numbers?
I would like to say yes, but it doesn't really matter. They change them so often and they're so easy to get.
Okay.
It's just the best thing you do is preventative. And if you ever have any questions, just tell the person you're going to end up calling them back, and then don't use the number they've given you. Obviously, Google up the appropriate number and then make the call.
Yeah.
That's just the safe, best thing to do at this point in time.
It would be nice too if we could find out a way to stop all of these ridiculous robocalls that happen 24 hours out of the day. I don't know why you have a do not call line.
Yeah,
I
it's-
honestly do not. I don't know why we bought into that, because it just doesn't work.
yeah, at least not the way I thought it was going to. That's for sure.
Well, when they were set up, those were actual phone calls with people on the other end.
Yeah.
And that's not what happens anymore.
Yeah.
No,
So wait,
now
are you
they're
getting
cloning the
warranty
number.
calls too?
I'm sorry, Jake.
Oh, I was just saying, are you getting your warranty has expired calls? 'Cause
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I don't even know.
On a
it's
car that was
warranty.
wrecked 5 years ago. Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, wow.
No, the good one is when you get a phone call from yourself.
If I know it's a scam, I will answer it and I'll say room number and problem, please. And then I just like, well, if it's a person, I convince them that they're calling an inbound hotel line and that the call's being recorded. I need to know their room number. And then they normally will remove my number from whatever call list they're using.
That's very good. May we use that?
You may, because I took it from somebody on the internet and I was like, that is great because it flusters them. Because then
Yeah.
you don't even have to confirm your number. They just click off that you're not a good number.
We actually have answered our phone. My husband will answer at the FBI crime analysis unit. And I answer it as the Clark County Sheriff's Office. Can I help you? And it's help for the ones where they're using the prefix, the local prefix, for our area.
Right. It's
And
just-
it has actually cut down on our calls. We still get a lot of most of ours now are out of Florida and Arizona.
Yeah.
But the local ones, we're maybe getting one a day, whereas we were getting 12 just from doing that.
It's
I
crazy.
mean,
I think that's kind of illegal, Cheryl.
why?
Well, honey, because you aren't the sheriff's department.
I'm not gonna
I'm
say.
not the repair service for the Marriott, but
I
still
know.
think-
No,
They
but
called
I
me.
don't care about the Marriott.
That
I'm
was
worried
not a
about
success,
bailing
that's
the
great.
girl out.
I'm not representing myself if they ask me a question. I mean, if I were to go on, if I were to answer a question as the sheriff's office, but I can answer my own private landline any way that I like.
Well, you guys should work that out between you instead of right now.
But
Let's
it
move
does
Well,
on.
find out for us. I don't want to have to bail a girl out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we're
But
still
we're-
recording, so I'm
Oh.
just cutting in to let you know that I'm stopping the recordings if there aren't any more questions.
Yeah.
So if there's any more questions anybody wanted to ask Brian, I'm gonna give that last opportunity before I close the recording.
I'm good.
All right, I'm gonna close the recording. The meeting will still go on, but I'm closing the recording as of this point.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Okay,